Thank you. Next, I'll recognize the member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, I always think it's a privilege to stand in this House and speak on behalf of the people of my riding of Scarborough-Guildwood, and I'm pleased to stand to speak to the time allocation motion of the bill today. 8 years ago, the people of my riding elected me as their representative, to be their voice, their strong voice in this House. And I'm very proud to say that they've done that in 3 consecutive elections. I'm grateful that each and every time I re-earn their trust. As the Ontario Liberal Party critic for democratic renewal, this legislation is not something that I take lightly. This legislation does not protect elections, nor does it defend democracy. This legislation is an attempt by the Ford government to explicitly silence those who would criticize the PC party, the candidates, and the Premier himself. Rather, it is an attempt, Speaker, to skew the election in their favour. It is indeed unconstitutional, as Justice Morgan has declared in his ruling on Bill 254. To circumvent this ruling, Ford's government has resorted to using the notwithstanding clause, specifically overriding Section 2 of the Charter, containing such fundamental rights as freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, and freedom of assembly, and Sections 7 to 15 of the Charter containing the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, freedom from arbitrary arrest or detention, a number of other legal rights, and the right to equality. Dangerously, this Act will also suspend the Ontario Human Rights Code. Speaker, it is these fundamental enshrined rights that Premier Ford and his government are putting at risk, taking away from every single Ontarian for their own selfish, political, and partisan motive. This is wrong. Instead of looking after the elderly in long-term care by ensuring that they have life-saving air conditioning, making schools safer for students and teachers to learn, and protecting essential workers who are risking their lives each and every day in the face of a raging pandemic with a deadly variant circulating. Here we are on a Sunday talking about Premier's political future. We have a cherished democracy in Canada that entrusts governments to do things in the best interest of citizens. The creation of the notwithstanding clause in the Charter was out of respect for this democracy. Just because the clause exists, it should not be used without merit. What Premier Ford is violating is all of our rights. This is not something Ontarians have asked for. Under the cover of COVID, it is not something many people are even knowing that is happening here today. Do not mistake their silence in this instance as agreement to its use. This rush legislation, happening literally in the dark of night, is wrong. It is selfish, and it is a gross abuse of power. This legislation amounts to a punitive sanction of those who might say something in disagreement to the government. In fact, a robust democracy requires that. It requires freedom of the press. It requires an informed electorate. It requires dissent. It is good for our democracy. Voters need that engagement. Speaker, finally, the courts have a role in our democracy. Their independence and their judgment is an important aspect of a liberal democracy. And clearly, with the rush debate that we are in today, shutting down the discussion, not inviting criticism from our stakeholders, dispensing of human rights, for what? For the outcome that the government seeks. We are 11 months away from the next election, and this legislation is weakening the voices of the people of this province. I will be voting no, Speaker, for this legislation, and I believe that the people of Ontario will remember this 11 months to come.